Hello, welcome to Polar Bears International House, located here in Churchill, Manitoba. We are a nonprofit organization solely dedicated to polar bear conservation. My name is Cassandra, and I'm an ambassador for polar bears here in Churchill, and I'd like to welcome you to our house. So one of the things that we need to first look at is the world from a polar bear scientist's perspective. This is not really an orientation that many of us might be familiar with, but for polar bears, this is the area of the world where we would find them. So here is Canada, which is one of the 5 countries where we can find polar bears. Located next to it, of course, is Alaska, so United States. Moving around to the other side of the world, we have the Russian Arctic, and then Norway also has polar bears, not on the mainland, but up in this archipelago called Svalbard. And then Greenland, of course, belonging to Denmark, is our 5th and final country. Being here at Polar Bears International House, Churchill, Manitoba is quite far south here, and this is the most southern area where we can find polar bears in western Hudson Bay and then to the South James Bay. But what unites all the polar bears is their sea ice habitat. So no matter where they live in the Arctic, the sea ice habitat's actually such a vast landscape. They travel on it, they will hunt from the sea ice, they will mate on the sea ice, but people also use the sea ice. They will get around traveling and hunting and for their cultural practices. But there's so much more about the sea ice that many people don't think about or realize, and that's that it's actually creating all of the energy that fuels this Arctic food web. The sea ice algae lives inside the small little cavities underneath the sea ice, and without that sea ice algae, we would not see this food web. It's producing a lot of lipid or fats that fuel these copepods, which are small microscopic organisms about the size of your fingernail, which are the main food for many Arctic fishes like the Arctic cod, we have capelin, and ring seals are the primary seal that we find in the Arctic, and they're the primary food for polar bears. And what polar bears love to eat is the ring seal's blubber. And they can get nice and big because they are specialized carnivores on the fat. And that blubber is full of all of those lipids that got produced underneath the sea ice. The size of the polar bear and how big they can get really gets connected all the way back down to the sea ice algae and the sea ice itself. Polar bears are very uniquely adapted to live in the Arctic. Their scientific name, Ursus maritimus, means sea bear, and some of the adaptations that allow them to live in this Arctic sea environment include these really sharp claws that help them grab and pull seals out of their breathing holes or out of the birth layers so that they can consume them. They have very large canine teeth and a very large gap between their teeth to help shear away their skin and get at that blubber, which gives them all their nutrients. Polar bears stay warm in the Arctic with their fur. Polar bears' fur is unique in that they have 2 layers of fur. So really close to their skin is this really tight, warm, fuzzy fur. You can think of it like a fleece sweater. And then over top, they have these hollow guard hairs that kind of acts like a rain jacket. It keeps them warm from the wind, from water or moisture, and it also helps them blend into that white environment and the vast Arctic ice landscape. How do we know how polar bears use their habitat? Originally, we've used technologies like this. This is a radio and GPS location collar that can actually help us find out where bears are moving on the sea ice, when they're swimming, when they're hunting. We can get lots of information from this. But with improved technology, we've actually made these tags smaller. And something that Polar Bears International has been supporting is new innovative ways of tracking polar bears and researching them. Here is a new initiative, Fur on Fur tags. This actually goes on the polar bear fur, and we're able to track their movements so that we can learn more about the different bear demographics and how they're using the sea ice landscape. Research has shown that polar bears actually stay in the areas where they were born. And so we have 19 different subpopulations of polar bears across the circumpolar Arctic. Again, we are in western Hudson Bay, which is one of the more southern populations. And what we know from satellite collars and the ear tags is that they generally will stay out on the sea ice as long as the sea ice is there. But in this area of the world, we have seasonal sea ice, and that's not true for all polar bears, but here what happens is they're born, on land in dens, and then they'll go out onto the sea ice with their mom, and when the sea ice breaks up, all polar bears come back on shore. This year, polar bears in western Hudson Bay came off the sea ice in mid-June. They will not go back out onto the sea ice until it forms again in the winter, which is typically in late November or early December. When they're on shore during this period, they're fasting. There's not a lot of food on land, and that's part of their normal life history. If we were here 30 or 40 years ago, the average fast was closer to 107 days. And with increased greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, we've actually seen the sea ice extent reduce. Therefore, polar bears are spending more time on land, increasing their fast. And in one of the ways that leads to population declines is when polar bears are forced to fast for that long, their body condition decreases. And when they get skinnier, they may not be able to hunt as well or compete for food as well, and that could also lead to them starving to death. Now we're getting very close to this threshold of 180 days where they will have to use too much energy that's already stored on their body, and we might see population decline. Polar Bears International is committed to the survival of polar bears across the circumpolar Arctic. We've been talking about polar bears in western Hudson Bay because that's where we are today. But in Churchill, Tundra Buggy 1 is a mobile broadcast studio that allows us to connect with classrooms and people all over the world. It's also allowed us to have a platform to do research here in Churchill, but PBI also does research in Alaska and Svalbard, supporting innovative techniques that can help ensure polar bear survival. We hope you're inspired to take action. We live in this world together, and we can ensure a future for polar bears and ourselves. Thank you so much for visiting Polar Bears International House, and please stay connected with us online.